So how did President Biden do last night during his press conference that I believe was called to assuage the concerns of the corporate media and others? Well, I don't know because I didn't watch it. Because I personally don't feel that this president of the United States needs to jump through any hoops for anybody. Allay concerns, assuage fears, he's done that already. It's been 15 days. He's done it. He's had an excess of 20 in-person appearances. He's given interviews. He's been to rallies. He's met with constituents. And for 3 grueling days, he hosted the leaders of NATO countries. There is literally nothing this man can do anymore to get the people who seem to be out for his blood to back off or to change their minds. I think any appearance at this point is just sort of a Rorschach test for our potential psychiatric problems, right? I mean, during that same period of time, Donald Trump made 2 rally appearances, I think, and they were both incredibly unhinged. But the problem is they were unhinged in the way we expect them to be. So the media can't be bothered anymore. This is a political contribution in kind, seriously. By not covering this stuff, by not having panels of experts on to fact check his rallies and to analyze the insanity he spews, is doing a huge disservice to the American people. So I don't know what the consensus is after the press conference last night, but I'm going to guess that it's something like this. President Biden was able to keep his base on his side, but it wasn't enough to convince X, Y, or Z. It's never going to be enough. Seriously, at this point, we have all of the evidence we need that the debate performance was an outlier and that he's fit to do the job he's running for because he's doing that job as we speak. By setting up these impossible standards, and we'll get to standards in a second, the pressure being brought to bear on this man is so enormous. So it's another self-fulfilling prophecy. Being told all the time, you need to be perfect. If you don't perform perfectly, it's all going to fall apart underneath your feet, is the perfect way to get somebody to screw up. The more you think about having to perform well, the likelier you are not to perform well. This could happen to anybody. I don't care how old or young you are. In sports, it's called the yips. This happens, the only sport I'm comfortable speaking to is tennis. It happens sometimes when tennis players start having trouble with their serve. One of the most important, or maybe the most important part of the serve is the toss. You have to toss the tennis ball up in the air at a particular point in space so you can hit the kind of serve you want with the placement you want. Sometimes the toss goes off. So, of course, more attention needs to be brought to working on the toss. And then some players get obsessed with the toss and are so anxious about it that they stop being able to toss the ball appropriately in the air and they just can't serve anymore. That's the yips. That's basically what corporate media are wishing upon President Biden. So I don't want to hear any more calls for his having to prove himself. If he, in your mind, if he hasn't already, he never will. Okay? But if he thinks he has, it's his decision to make, and he decides to stay in this race, as I believe he should. But again, my opinion means nothing. It's just my opinion. everybody up until now who's been giving him grief and calling for him to step down needs to stop. And also, I'd like to say this. If you're a rich donor to Biden's campaign and Democrats in general, and you are holding that money hostage to get your way, which is to have President Biden step down, you're part of the problem. You're acting like what you want counts more than the millions of people who voted for President Biden in the primary. So please cut that out. It is not your decision. Okay? And let's think for a second about what the media haven't been covering while putting President Biden through his paces, while calling on him to step down, while I would suggest creating the narrative instead of reporting actual news. We've heard practically nothing about Donald Trump's Project 2025, a fascist playbook put together in a laboratory at the Heritage Foundation, which is a blindingly misogynistic, anti-LGBTQ plus racist document that every American needs to know about. We need to know what policies this Republican Party is going to enact if tragedy occurs and Donald Trump gets put back into the White House. We need to know how horrific a Republican administration, any Republican administration, not just one quote unquote run by Donald Trump, will be for the American worker. We need to know that there will be no more overtime pay. We need to know there will be no protections for union workers. We need to know that this would be devastating, absolutely devastating for women in this country. There will be a national abortion ban. They will come after IVF, birth control, and the right to privacy, which means then that they will go after things like Obergefell, which led the way to marriage equality. We know that the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court is absolutely down with all of those things. And this doesn't even scratch the surface. We haven't even talked about what's going to happen to this planet because of reversals in climate change legislation. We haven't even talked about what's going to happen to civil rights and voting rights. And we haven't even talked about the absolutely vicious, inhumane plans they have for immigrants and their so-called political enemies. What else hasn't the press been covering? They have not been covering, it sort of leaves me speechless, but let me just take a beat here for a second because it's just so mind-numbing. I'm reminded that yesterday, Donald was supposed to be sentenced in a New York courtroom after having been convicted for 34 felonies. Why wasn't he there? The judge had to postpone the sentencing because of aforementioned corrupt, illegitimate Supreme Court supermajority, who, in one of the most dangerous, far-reaching decisions ever made in the history of this country, crowned Donald Trump, of all people, king. He may never be held accountable, even for those crimes of which he has been found guilty. I haven't seen much mention of that in the news either. So please, corporate media, do your job. And to those of you watching, if you want to know what's really going on in the world, stick with us. We don't pull punches. We are not going to look away. We will cover for you what needs to be covered at Mary Trump Media. And that is something I can absolutely promise you. Hang in there.